Yes, sir. We're officially back at it. This is Boog Nice coming at you with another top something or other. I guess this will be a top five. You know, I started doing these top 10, top five videos as it relates to 2020 releases and purchases a little early, but I wanted to carve out a block of time to knock out quite a few of these this week. So, right now, I'm going to hit you guys with my top five most disappointing figures of 2020. All right, let's do it.
This ain't for no scalper. You a scalper? Then fuck out shit. This one's for them real collectors. That's army building and posing figures. Marvel Legends, imports, mini maybe I'm fucking with them. Hype beast, we know about you. Stay buying figs, don't know about it.
This was a wonderful year for collecting. I was pretty much happy throughout the year. I mean, collecting and buying certain things, and some of the things that were released this year really did bring me a lot of joy, especially considering that we spent more than half of the year inside and couldn't really do much of anything. So my criteria for picking some of my most disappointing figures were they had to be figures that I actually purchased with my own money. They couldn't be review samples or gifts or anything like that. It had to be something that I actually bought with my own hard-earned cash. Had to be something in 2020. Didn't necessarily have to be something that was released in 2020, just something that I did purchase in 2020. But it turns out everything on my list was actually released in 2020. And the reasons for why these things were disappointing to me personally vary, but without any further ado, let's get into my list. Coming in at number 5 for my most disappointing figure in 2020, it's going to be the Marvel Legends Strong Guy Build-A-Figure Wave Warpath. A figure I was very excited about initially when I first saw him at Toy Fair. Obviously, I'm a huge Marvel Legends fan. I'm a huge fan of completing teams in figure form, and this was a guy that we really needed a redo for, and a guy that would get us closer to completing our 90s X-Force team. But when I finally got him in hand, I realized there were some issues with the figure that maybe I overlooked initially in my initial excitement. I didn't really end up liking the head sculpt. I didn't like the shoulder pads, and I do think that the figure is actually undersized. I do think that he should be larger. When I got him side by side with the Marvel Legends 90s Cable, I realized that he was a bit undersized. I wish he had more interchangeable hands. At the very least, I just wish they actually nailed the head sculpt and it was a better looking version of Warpath. Similarly, I wasn't really impressed with his brother Thunderbird, who came in the 2-pack with Storm, but I think I was more interested in them nailing Warpath than I was Thunderbird, and so this one was kind of a bummer for me. So number 5 is going to be Warpath. And an honorable mention that would probably be around the number 5 slot would have to be the Soap Studio, the Dark Knight Rises Batman figure. But that figure actually was really, really bad. Only thing is I didn't purchase that figure. It was a review sample, and there were some things that were salvageable about it. You guys should go back and check out that review. My number 4 slot is going to go to the Mezco Toys 112 Collective John Wick figure. Another really disappointing figure for me because it was one I was really looking forward to. It took us so long to get this figure in hand. There were so many times that it was pushed back and teased, and it looked like they were going to update things and make the figure better. And the end result was really not much better than what we saw initially. In fact, I think it may have been worse. The one thing that they really needed to do here was nail the head sculpt, and I don't think they did. And then the second thing that really needed to be done was he needed to be on one of their better, more articulated bucks, and he was not. It seems like Mezco has been given a lot of attention to their Gomez and Skulls and Baron Bins and that whole world of figures, and kind of neglecting the DC and Marvel and movie properties that me personally that I'm more interested in. When I reviewed this figure, it did get a lot of attention, pretty decent view count. You guys should probably go back and check that out too, but Mezco John Wick was super disappointing to me. I thought they would for sure be crowned as having the best John Wick on the market because Mafex didn't really knock it out of the park either. Some things that were salvageable, the weapons, and even that in certain instances weren't that great. Some of the handguns didn't have the removable clips, some did. The weapons actually didn't even look as detailed as some of the other weapons we received in the past, which is weird because all Mezco had to do was just reissue some of the same weapons. The case was cool, the dog was cool, but ultimately this was a dud. My number 3 slot is going to go to the Bandai Tamashii Nations SH Figure Arts Mandalorian figure. This was the first Mandalorian that they released in his original armor before he upgraded to the Beskar armor. Obviously, Mandalorian was a huge hit over the past 2 years, and I was really interested in continuing to build my Star Wars characters through the import company because I had been actually not getting too many Black Series things, even though I kind of switched, I guess, throughout this year and realized that it's probably better to just stick to Black Series. You're getting more for your money. This was a direct representation of that thought, of that feeling, because this was a dud for a lot of different reasons. I did not like the proportions. I didn't like the actual sculpt. I didn't like the way the head sat on the neck. There was a lot of moving parts with this figure. It seemed really delicate, and the way you had to attach his long gun and the pistol and this and that, it just did not feel cool. It didn't feel good, and it just looked really weird. Now, I was able to salvage the look of this figure by upgrading him with the John Walker Customs neck peg extension, and that did make the figure look a lot better. And then it made me kind of want to get the Beskar armor version, but my experience with this figure just kind of turned me off and made me actually repel from some of the Star Wars stuff from SHF. And so that's why he was my number 3 most disappointing figure in 2020. My number 2 slot is going to go to the Medicom MAFEX Wolverine figure. Now, the figure did photograph really nicely, but the one thing that really annoyed me about this figure was the claws. They were just extremely too long. They looked absolutely ridiculous. I didn't really like the color scheme on the outfit. They kind of took their own liberties with that. But seeing that they're going to re-release this figure in his brown and yellow costume, it made me kind of feel a little better about possibly picking up that figure. The unmasked head sculpt was pretty nice, but I also didn't really like the proportions of the figure. I think he was a little too tall and slender and should have been a little more shorter and stockier. You know, if you see him standing here next to Cyclops, it doesn't look quite right. Wolverine's supposed to be that short, scrappy sort of brawler dude. But ultimately, it was just these claws that looked too stupid to me, and it kind of disappointed me. Now, there were some QC issues, some loose parts, and the arm coming apart at the bicep. You know, some different things here and there according to, I guess, where you purchased it. But Mafex really needs to clean up their QC issues in 2021 and do better. This was one that I really, really wanted to love and ended up just barely liking him. So this was number 2. And my number 1 most disappointing figure in 2020 is going to go to the Medicom Mafex Hush Batman. That's right. Batman was trash. A lot of people love this figure. I really did not. I really wanted this to be my definitive best Batman in 6-inch form. And people still say that it probably is still the best Batman we've had so far. But again, I didn't like the body mold. I didn't like the sculpt. I don't think it really represented Hush Batman. He was a little too slender in my opinion. One thing I really did love about this figure though was the unmasked head sculpt, which looked phenomenal and it looked great. Swapped on the other Bruce Wayne bodies and other bodies in general from Mafex, but this is not the best representation of Jim Lee's art on Hush in my opinion, and the cape was just awful. This is a god awful cape. I don't care what anybody says. I call this Batman the Snuggie Batman. The cape was just too much. Yes, it's good for photographing and for dynamic stuff, and it is a okay representation of how elaborate and ridiculous the cape was in that book. But Mafex has not really done their thing as far as the soft goods game goes or the tailoring goes. And confirmed by my man Billy, there's been a lot of QC issues with the cape. He's repaired this thing a lot. We talked about this last night on the A.C.B.A. podcast. This thing is a nightmare to even display with unless you have him alone among a rooftop or something like that. When you try to get him in something dynamic, ground level with other characters, it's really difficult to display with this cape. It's too bulky. There should have been another interchangeable cape that you can put on for a more relaxed look, and I think that's where they dropped the ball. Also, I did have some QC issues on my version. The knee came apart, didn't quite break, but again, Mafex has got to do better with QC issues in 2021. This is an $80, $90 figure, and I think that it should have been better. I don't think they quite knocked this out of the park, and I really was rooting for them and for this figure, but this one really disappointed me, and that's why it's at my number 1 slot. So Those are my 5 most disappointing purchases or figures in 2020. Thanks for hanging out. As always, rate, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell down there. And until next time, peace.